for this APEC workshop series exploring innovation in digital tourism for MSMEs post-COVID-19. My name is Bonnie Rivendell. I'm a Program Director at the Australian APEC Study Centre, RMIT University, and I'll be introducing today's session. Firstly, I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of Australia's Indigenous people. Performing an acknowledgement is an important part of the path towards reconciliation within the Australian community. As such, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the East Kulin Nations, the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people where I am speaking from today, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge elders from all the lands and language groups across Australia and all other APEC economies. And now for a few housekeeping matters. Please mute your microphone when in this session. You can enter any questions or comments into the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. And there is also a raise hand function under the participant list you may like to use for spoken questions or comments during the workshop. To create an optimised viewing experience, we suggest that you utilise the stack or side-by-side viewing options. And please also note that this session will be recorded, and the recording as well as the slide deck and videos will be available after the event. Our facilitator for today is Stephen Joyce. Many of you will have known him for the last 2 days. Stephen is a digital innovation educator who has been working with tourism MSMEs across the Asia Pacific for many years. And I'm very much looking forward to the agenda that he's compiled for today. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks for that introduction. First, today we're going to explore a few different things. Over the last few days, we've been exploring an overview of issues that have arisen from digitalisation of tourism and the effect that COVID-19 has had in shaping our transition to the many new ways of working digitally. Yesterday, we focused on what support can be provided to MSMEs to set them up for success. We explored how to enable a successful digital presence and what it is about digital experiences that we need to understand as supporting bodies. In our masterclass, we explored some of the complexities in having a digital footprint and developed a list of areas for us to familiarise ourselves with in order to provide support from organisations and economies to our MSME tourism operators. In this final session, we refocus on the bigger picture, taking in a high-level viewpoint from a range of APEC economies, Vietnam, Singapore and Korea. We then explore what policy pathways we could be developing by exploring cross-border and regional cooperation, new technology applications to solve COVID-19 travel issues, and also digital inclusion, especially with cultural and Indigenous factors. We explore all of these concepts whilst considering data privacy, online security, and digital inclusion over the many different demographic, cultural, and geographical regions across APEC. So some of the things that we're seeing in digital tourism that are affecting all economies are the use of technology and applications. So we're seeing more and more people use not just online services, which has been our more traditional digital marketing aspect, but also using technology on mobile phones. And we can expect from what we've seen in the research, we can expect that this is only going to grow, that mobile phones really are now the main way that people wish to communicate, and more they are taking over the role for all of our applications. Now, this, of course, has ramifications for small operators and larger operators combined. They need to be mobile friendly. So we call this responsive when we talk about it in technical terms, and we're really talking about the ability for a website to be opened on a mobile phone and still be read easily. This is quite a difficult aspect because it means that older websites simply don't work. They have to be updated in order to enable this type of technology. And it can mean the difference between reading knowledge about a particular tourist attraction or experience and not being able to read it at all. I'm sure you've all had the experience where you go online and you find a site that you wish to visit, but you're on your mobile phone, and so you actually find that you can't read the information that's there, or you can't use it with the touch interface, because that is the big difference between a mobile app and the online version of a particular website. The other thing that we're seeing, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later on today, is the use of contact tracing apps. And this is particularly important for COVID-19 recovery. We know that each of our economies wants to be able to track people in the way that we know if there's been a COVID outbreak, whether people have been exposed to it or not. We will be looking at this particular topic with a particular technology called CommonPass later on today. But one of the things that we notice at the moment is that it seems that not just every economy, but even down to different businesses within economies have their own version of contact tracking. It might be a piece of paper that people sign on the way into a restaurant. They might scan a barcode and get traced that way. But it is a problem for us on not just member economy level, but across the whole of APEC. We know that we're going to have to build up some sort of passport or health declaration system. This also comes out, though, when we actually get to accommodation. So more and more travellers will be asking, actually, will my accommodation be biosecure? Will I be able to get to a particular place and know that they have done the right things to make sure that there is no COVID in the room, is what it comes down to. So this affects the way that we support businesses to clean their services, and not just clean them, but also be seen to keeping them COVID-free. So there could be things that we could think about from a wider economy level on how it is that we could support systems like this in order to give our people more confidence to travel during COVID. We do know that some of the factors that we're seeing over and over again is that there is a focus on local. People are more and more interested to go and explore their local areas and local, how big is local? Local is as large as a particular economy lets people travel. And we realise that mainly this involves the fact that people aren't necessarily travelling as much between the economies as they used to. And this is going to be something that we need to deal with at a high level. We need to be doing things like assuring that flights or travel are also safe. So even though we haven't talked about that side of things directly with digital tourism, it's actually quite a huge factor. We actually need to use things like marketing as well to make sure that our constituents can be assured that if they get on a bus or if they get on a plane, even if it's an internal flight, the efforts have been made to make sure that people are safe on these travel. So the other technology that we're seeing come into play, which I think has just been a massive revolution in the last year, is contactless experiences. Being able to check in completely contactlessly is now as important as e-commerce and the ability to be able to pay for things online or with our mobile phones as opposed to paying in cash. What we're also seeing around the effect of COVID-19 is jobs and skills have been affected massively. But the thing that goes along with that is that, do we have the right balance of skills when people are trying to find a destination to go to? This is particularly difficult when you're talking about regional areas with lots of small operators who might not have the technology ready to go. So there's some of the issues that we'll be trying to explore today. From Singapore, we'll hear from Mr. Jeremy Tan, Chief Executive Officer of Liquid Group. Jeremy is a veteran in the payment industry, having launched and co-invested, built and divested multiple successful technology companies in the past 2 decades. his latest venture being the founder and CEO of Liquid Group Pte Ltd, a cross-border mobile payment company headquartered in Singapore with presence across the Asia Pacific. Jeremy has a very interesting case study for us, and I'd love to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. As Stephen mentioned, my proposal it's very my presentation is very basically what's happening on the ground based. When we looked at this forum, and we were deciding what would be most relevant for us to present, and we wanted to just share this thing that we're so excitedly that we've done together with our airport, together with our tourism industry, and together with a lot of as Stephen has mentioned, we are a cross-border firm. We love, obviously, the tourism industry. I think, like everyone here, the last 12, 16 months has been a really interesting experience for all of us. But of course, in that environment, we have put together certain platforms that we think are working with stakeholders in the industry to think, when things are opening, it's not gonna be the same. It's not gonna, it would be very tentative. It's not gonna be a blanket opening. So there are certain things that we obviously need to cater and do our best in terms of trying to manage when different economies starts to commingle. What can we do to ensure that when tourism starts, it's not a false start, it wouldn't reverse. So a lot of thinking went into this. So it distilled down into a very practical implementation that we work with our airport in Singapore. And we're just so excited to give this opportunity just to do a show and tell. So as Stephen mentioned, it's quite a different format as the rest of the presenters. But we're happy to just run through this. So if you could, Kevin, if you could jump to the next slide. Well, the next slide again. Just a little bit on us in terms of what we do. We are a private company. We've been in payments for many years. Not so sure whether this history is entirely relevant in this slide, but just to give a bit of background, just to frame us in terms of why we're talking about this. We predominantly in payment. We went from online to digital online to physical to now digital. But more importantly, what we wanted to convey is we are operating in multiple Asia Pacific countries. We are, only incorporated in 4, but we linked to about 13 countries to allow cross-border payments. And so when we try to create something coherent to allow, how travelers will pay and why and how in a safe way, this is something that we speak on behalf of also all our partners across the region, because we're essentially implementing the same thing. So if we go to the next slide. And this is the reaction to COVID. Okay, so this is one thing that I think most of us would have heard or have advised or advisory in terms of do use contactless payments. And most markets, contactless means the tap, which is basically using the card or the phone and you tap. And the idea behind it is quite straightforward. Obviously, you want to minimize exchange of cash and coins. And contactless payments and not card payments is, we're trying to limit the exchange of cards. So as we look through the whole spectrum of the different countries, certain countries are more paranoid and certain countries are less so. And in terms of the exchange of cards, obviously with the banks playing a big role, saying no cards would be a very dangerous proposition. So obviously contactless is one, but there's also a contactless proposition for QR, which it can operate in 1 meter apart. So in the most extreme environment, QR payments, you don't even have to tap it. It's not about waving a phone or a card. You can scan a QR. It's literally 1 meter apart. You can scan it behind a barrier, a transparent barrier. And that was one of the imperatives of why a lot of adoptions around frontline retailers and we've I think the total network have about 2.1 million retailers on our partnership network. And when they speak to the retailers, some of them, in markets that handled the situation a lot better, they were less worried, and some, let's just say, they were a little bit more worried. So what we have, a good in between is ensuring that we have the flexibility and the tools to support contactless payments, whether it's tap NFC, which is a little bit pricier, is a little bit tighter in terms of the nearness, in terms of the transaction, the nearest in terms of proximity that they have, all the way down to QR. And this slide that you will see is all about QR. It's 1 meter apart. And research has also shown that this has also risen. I've, obviously extracted Visas and Juniper's research on this. Digital payments is rising, cash and coins is going down. It's been a big boom, not to sound too happy on that one, but the truth of the matter is cash and coins drastically has gone down around the regions. I think as the metrics come along, people will be more, the impact will be more and more obvious. But conversely, I think from the real numbers as we see from financial services statistics, contactless payments have literally been very, very significant in this project, this period. So the contactless payments that we will address is QR, and not to downplay the fact that contactless tap is a major component to that, but we focus on the QR, partially because to also accommodate the 1 meter proximity that we need to be able to transact, and not just having to tap or swipe it. So the next slide, if we could, Kevin. Thank you. So I mean, this is in a very strange way. I'm just presenting in a very straightforward how this happens. So QR, I think most of us will be familiar if we look at QR from China. I think most of us have always heard of Alipay, we've heard of WeChat. But this is something that we would like to point out as well, is that most of the national governments have some form of QR payments. If not QR on a national framework, at least there have been multiple fintech wallets that has gone around the market. So, some have gone extremely big, some have obviously died off, but there is still a whole healthy a group of QR players that serve the market pretty well. I think those in Southeast Asia will be familiar with Grab or Go. I think in North Asia, there's PayPay, and a whole splattering of different QR players. So in that sense, Changi Airport being a hub and a good transit point for a lot of the different travelers, obviously had to work on a solution that could accommodate as many of the different diverse regional and even global, I would say, wallet players. So what they did, or what we did together with them, was to put together a platform that could literally take everybody together. So it's a little bit flippant to just say put everybody together, but it took a lot of effort than most would realize. But effectively, from national schemes to individual large wallets, they created a hub that basically accommodates wallets from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, South Korea, Japan. There are some countries that haven't announced yet, but let's just say in the Middle East, as well as in the South Asia and Latam. So in that sense, it is, I would call it global, but it's making a good impact in terms of coverage. And that market base itself, it's basically QR. If people who are unfamiliar, it's just a little, a little thing that you scan and the phone magically redirects you and takes it off. It's secure, as proven by the large scale usage in China and a lot of national wallets being on it. And it's contactless. So in response to COVID and why we're doing it, so we've taken a couple of steps. First, we identified that, QR is one, identified the players around the market. We got everybody together, put them onto one platform. And we took advantage of the lull in travel and make sure everybody from airport down and, from downtown to airport, we're slowly moving it off to ensuring that everybody knows how to use it. It's a lot easier to train as we expected because Singapore is well penetrated by Ali and WeChat. So the retailers were ready. There were subsidies, obviously, thrown in for adoption, making it cheaper, but obviously those are more temporal. We expect that to go off. But in a sense, it's a concerted multi-industry effort to first offer options to the retailers. I think as we go into policy planning, sometimes the guy, the last mile frontline worker is the one that, makes or breaks how the implementation goes. So while we're trying, or I won't speak for them, but let's just say as markets open, certain markets to prevent and to avoid certain friction when people start catering for tourists in an industry, as I repeated many times that we love, we want to create platforms to make them feel safe. And so that whole endeavor, that whole entire project has kicked off, and we have converted a fair base in preparation for opening, and opening is as elusive as ever. But just to say that as a matter of time, as a matter of fact, Changi is ready. So this is, if we could hop to the next slide. So in that, just doing payments, by sheer talking about payments, that wasn't enough, because to give them extra boost in terms of when the opening happens, combining the fact that with now a safe, efficient way of paying, there was a move towards, and this is something that I'm very sensitive in terms of explaining this too much, because there is also a big entire push towards how you're going to market with COVID. Obviously, let's just say that the traditional players, the big, there has been a reshuffling of that, in terms of who's around anymore. So obviously, as the market opens, there is a big push to basically reintroduce the digital, the tourist assets to tourism, the tourists. So in that sense, how do we do that? How is that going to be managed? How is Singapore going to basically tell every incoming tourist, you know, what's great and who's ready and who's prepared and what's the latest thing to go to? So obviously we needed to market it. We need to throw in terms of how to incentivize, it's a combination of marketing plus incentive. So they bundled it all together. They killed off the concept of the digital, the payment voucher. It doesn't exist anymore. You don't want to carry little papers to tell you that first you have to distribute it, then you have to send it. First you have to manufacture it, print it, distribute it, and then after that you have the more critical part is that they will be exchanged for discounts, you have to be exchanged at the point of sale, which is something that they were definitely against. So bundled together with that, the digitized vouchers. So in that sense, working again with people on the ground, creating a streamlined version to allow retailers to market onto the platform to tourists, but more importantly, during the time of transaction, when they are paying, all the discounts, all the variables in terms of rebates are all bundled in together. There will be no explanation, because first addressing a lot of problems at the same time, because imagine giving a voucher and a person who is visiting is of a different culture or language background, you know, there might be disagreements, there might be disputes. They automated all that, put everything together so that when you scan it, the system tells you, okay, you've entitled to discounts, it's been applied in your language, and it's done. In that sense, minimizing exchange of the physical voucher, and also minimizing potential disputes along the way. So I thought that was pretty smart, and putting it together. There's one slight thing that they've done as well, which allows, they also digitize the receipts. So this is one of those things, no more exchange of the thermal paper, in a way going green, but be very practical. The main driver of this is to avoid and prevent the exchange of receipts. And so it's a three-pronged thing: prevent the exchange of cash, coins, and cards, prevent the exchange of physical promotion materials, and preventing the physical exchange of receipts. So this is all three things. I actually had a little voucher demo. I don't know whether it's appropriate. It's really very down to the ground. But if you do, I can always circle back to this. But that's my presentation. It's just a little thing in the midst of all the opening and the big plans and policy that everybody is doing, just to put our little voice in to say that we've been working with retailers, and one of the retailers that we want to mention was Changi, and planning is ahead as we wait for the policymakers and everyone to decide when the opening is, and to see everybody face to face again. So if we jump to the next slide, Kevin. That's it. Have any questions? Happy to take them, or happy to even run through the video if you think that's appropriate. But else, that's my presentation. Stephen, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Mr. Tan. It's a very interesting case study that you've got there. I think one of the interesting points that I might ask you a little bit more about is, given that you're talking about the area of Changi Airport, it's basically like an airport mix with a shopping centre. So it includes an awful lot of very small businesses, and we might call them micro businesses as well. I'm wondering how they have all adapted to taking up this new type of technology, and whether you had any difficulties or issues in getting that sort of buy-in across them.
Short answer is no, but it's more nuanced than that. So what I'll say is this: it is you are right. Changi is a whole entire ecosystem on its own. So from a retail to F&B, you have your fast food to your luxury stores, from the really branded big retailers to as a support of our local businesses, you have your small micro SMEs, all the way down to, if you look at it, food canteens. We have multiple canteens within Changi that services their own staff, as well as tourists. Tourists, strangely, for a little experience of the local food in Singapore, do go to our canteens and so on. So I would say that the micro businesses is actually a lot more open, I would say, than we expected. But there's always the holdouts, the people who say, and to be fair, I think sometimes it has to be mindful in terms of when we introduce a technology platform, some businesses will just not adopt it. It's just a fear of technology, and it's quite understandable fear. It takes time. So I would not say that those who were not receptive was specifically to this platform. It's just specific to any change, and with the Changi itself, to their credit, does provide a good supportive environment, and we do have support from our government agencies to try to educate, to try to allay any concerns in terms of any changes. I think we've hammered down the whole narrative about digitalization, the need to change, but there's always that last mile, the hard work, like I said, the pavement pounding. So the small businesses, we tend to be able to convert them reasonably easily. It's easier than expected, but those who don't, there are definite difficulties for I won't call them stubborn, but there will be definitely those, and we should we mitigate around that. It's not their fault actually. Yeah,
that's true. Look, thanks very much for your presentation today. It was really great to get that viewpoint. We'll move on to the next presenter now. So I'd like to now introduce Ms. Deborah Park. Ms. Park is the External Relations Coordinator at the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism of the Republic of Korea. Since January 2016, Deborah has been serving as the main point of contact at MCST regarding international cooperation in the field of tourism, both bilaterally and multilaterally, including the UNWTO, OECD, G20, ASEAN +3 and APEC. I'd like to welcome Deborah to the stage now, and I'll pass it across to you.
Stephen, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I wasn't really expecting to go next, but okay. Well, good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on wherever you are in the world. Greetings from Korea. Like I've been introduced right now, my name is Deborah Park, and I work for the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism of the Republic of Korea. It is most definitely an honor and pleasure to be presenting Korea's case on day 3 of the APEC workshop series, Innovation in Digital Tourism for MSMEs post-COVID-19, which Korea is proud to co-sponsor. So before I start, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank our Australian colleagues for organizing such a wonderful workshop under the TWG umbrella. I feel sorry that I wasn't able to participate in day 1 and 2 because from what Stephen has been talking about, it definitely sounds very interesting, and I'll be looking forward to the final digital publication of the entire workshop. So if I may start my presentation today, next slide, please. So basically what I want to talk to you about today is what Korea is doing in terms of digital transformation and empowering MSMEs. But before I dive straight into the main topic on what Korea is doing to support the digital transformation of tourism enterprises, especially for MSMEs, I will briefly touch upon the tourism situation in Korea. That is the impact of the COVID-19 on the tourism sector. And then I will present you with different kinds of support initiatives that Korea is currently implementing or planning to implement within this year. And finally, just to touch upon the challenges that we're facing in the course of implementing these initiatives and how we plan to move forward and onward. Next slide, please. So this is what pre-COVID looks like before the COVID-19 outbreak. Like any other economy in the APEC region, like the rest of the world, Korea was actually doing pretty okay in terms of numbers on inbound tourists, despite some rough years like 2015 because we had the MERS, another coronavirus, and 2017 for political tension, but still we were doing okay. And we managed to reach a record high of 17.5 million inbound international tourists in 2019. But then, as we all know, came the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So this is the number that I'm presenting to you. Having been one of the first countries to be heavily affected, severely affected by the COVID-19 outbreak outside mainland China, it goes without saying that the tourism market of Korea has been also very hard hit by the pandemic, like any other economy in the APEC region. We have experienced approximately a minus of 85% decrease in both inbound and outbound tourists last year. And although the exact amount of the tourism revenue loss of the country is unclear since we're still crunching the numbers, big data that we have collected from credit card companies indicate that people have been spending less on tourism operations, like 83%. And approximately 50% less on hotels and accommodations in 2020 compared to the previous year. Well, actually, I don't know how you do it in other economies, but in Korea, when we say the tourism sector, it's defined under the Tourism Promotion Act and excludes the aviation industry. But since tourism is such a cross-cutting sector within its nature, if we look at the aviation industry, it also had like a 70% drop of card spending. So overall, there is no doubt that the tourism sector is still struggling to survive under this unprecedented crisis. Although Korea, per se, tourism only contributes to less than 5% of our GDP. So we're doing better on the bigger economy, I guess, but still the tourism sector is very much devastated. Next slide, please. So against this backdrop, the Korean government has established the following as its policy vision for 2021 this year to face the crisis as an opportunity to strengthen competitiveness through market recovery and innovation. So in order to realize this vision, we have three major strategies. And the first, so 1/3 of it, a big size of it, relies on to support the innovation of the tourism industry. Next slide, please. So, well, based on these strategies, we have a number of initiatives, but today I would like to focus on mostly the new initiatives that we're working on because, like we all know, digital transformation, it was coming, it was there, but COVID-19 has definitely accelerated its process, facilitated the digitalization, and we are in the midst of implementing new initiatives. So I'll go through the financial and technical and capacity building support, just the representative initiatives today. So under financial support, we have the Tourism and SMEs Innovation Voucher Initiative. So why this voucher falls under the financial support category is that we just provide financial support in the form of vouchers to enhance the digital competency of tourism SMEs. So this is done through a matching service. There would be a supplier on the other end, tourism companies on the other side, and the suppliers would also have to apply for this initiative. And when companies have a need for, as you can see on the slide, for product development, consulting, or marketing, they can choose one and go for the matching service. So this initiative supports about 3 sectors, 6 programs within 13 service types, and will help the MSMEs if they want a particular service built into their business, they can apply for the voucher within this month, so until April, and then they'll be selected and they can use the voucher until November, and December will be for an evaluation month. So this project will run throughout the year. Next slide, please. Another part, sorry, I think it's next is technical support. As for technical support, we have a consulting initiative which consults MSMEs on their digital transformation. So this is to support the traditional travel operators to harness the digital transformation through new business model development and professional counseling. It pretty much sounds the same with the previous initiatives. The difference is that the previous one is a voucher, and this one actually gives you consulting services and makes you realize which parts are your weaknesses and what you need more to do in this digitalization process. So those are the key programs that you can look into later on. They tell you what the new trends of the tourism industry and ITC support mechanisms and overall management. Next slide, please. Another initiative that I wanted to mention is the TIPS initiative. It's short for Technology Incubating Program for Startups. Now, this initiative is very interesting because it started with, we have a ministry for SMEs and startups, and this ministry started this initiative to identify, uprising and very promising tech companies. So we're cooperating with the Ministry of MSMEs and Startups to identify those tech companies who have potential in tourism, or those companies who are willing to partner up with tourism companies. This is a private investment-led technology startup support project, which means that the private sector, the private investment funds, the companies decide to sponsor or invest into a particular tech company. And then from that part on, they suggest this company they have invested to the government, and then the government decides to give further investment. So if this certain amount is invested by private investments like 100,000 USD, the government can give extra investment up to 620,000 USD. And what's interesting is that we have fifth cases. So as you can see on the non-tourism company, it was a drawn design and production company, and it has drawn technology, but then we kind of converged its business with tourism. So they are now producing a tourism content, which is called, well, in Korea, we call it night tourism. So these drones have lights, and, you know, they have the show on. So they have developed this tourism content for local festivals and tourist spots. Another example would be a tourism company. Originally, they did rental services, car rentals, and they also had the driver service. So it was a package, but then came along the big data and AI technology, and now they're providing recommendation services utilizing big data analysis. Slide, please. Okay, so if we move on to the capacity building part, actually we have had an interesting survey last year. 300 tourism MSMEs participated in this survey, and we asked if you need to learn or use IT skills in your line of work. And well, casino, tour operators, and MICE, these are all categories under our Tourism Promotion Act. So the casino industry said 100% they need these skills, and tour operators 82, the MICE industry 69, so this is pretty high. And then we also asked, when you're hiring new talents, are you going to look for these IT technology skills within these new employees? And hotel and accommodation sector answered up to 75%, and MICE was the following at 62.5. Despite the need, what the industry needs and what they're urging to have, digital capacity is not something that our tourism companies are harnessing at the moment. So starting this year, it's a new initiative. We have launched this initiative to provide digital capacity building for tour operators. Now, tour operators are I think they are the most devastated sector within tourism right now, maybe after aviation, but we have had financial support given to the tour operators, and most of it kind of ended near November last year. So they were trying to stay afloat with the government money they were being supported of, but now this COVID-19 pandemic is getting longer than expected. No one can know. So, and most of these tour operators are going out of business or either giving their employees leave, unpaid leave. So we decided to maybe just take this chance and to give them training and education. So it will be like a 3 to 4 week course. We aim to do it for 10,000 persons within this year. It's going to be a start. This is actually only just 10% of the whole tourism workforce in Korea that we estimated. That's a start. And we're going to provide advanced levels courses like understanding the mobile system. I think as Stephen mentioned in the beginning that also the websites you go on cannot be shown into your mobile phones. Those little things that matter in tourism, the digital content creation, and even tourism operators right now, they do not have a hang of social media. So from the basic level to the advanced level is what we're planning to do. Next slide, please. And also, we, the ministry, along with KTO, Korea Tourism Organization, we are also trying to build a new training center for future tourism talent and a separate education platform for the future generations, those who will try to work in the tourism sector to learn new digital skills. So we need some kind of place to educate them, right? So we'll be establishing this new training center until towards the end of next year. This year, it will be opening partially, and it will have training programs on these following courses, as you can see: tourism planning, marketing, utilizing IT technology, and so forth. And we're looking forward to the opening of this center as well. Next slide, please. Now, okay, that just went. Okay, I think that's my bad. I'll just read what's up in the slide. So the challenges that we face are, I think they're all pretty interlinked in a way. The fast-paced digital world, it's ever-changing. It's very high-paced, and the traditional tourism companies they're not capable of following up. And the challenges that we're facing is that the skills and the necessary support that the private sector is asking us for them to do, for us to provide, sometimes it's an imbalance. It's the digital divide, the access of information and the communication. The information is just there. Some of them don't get the initiative, these good initiatives. Some part of the private sector have access to. And I think the most important thing is that, like any other government, I think now we're focusing more on to have our tourism companies survive this crisis first. Because if we do not have these companies afloat, after everything resumes, we won't have an industry or a sector to revitalize anyway. So it depends on do you want these companies to just survive this crisis, or is it just, do you take a stop, break, and prepare for the longer term? But I had an interesting meeting with some of the private sectors in the previous week, and they were like, you can teach us to catch fish, but right now I'm so hungry I can't not even go there. So it's a simple thing, like you just need to survive right now, and you're talking about later and later on. So I think these are actually the hands-on things that we need to focus on. Think about how to sustain these tourism enterprises, MSMEs, and then also to go into a longer run. And also, like as government, we have budget constraints. Like I talked about, we were organizing a capacity building program, but the private sector that I consulted with, they didn't know we had this program in the first place. So I think the information is not being carried around. And also, like I mentioned, that we're starting with a 10% of the whole tourism workforce. So I think we have a long way to go. Okay, I think that's all that I have prepared for today. I don't think Korea is one of the best practices. I think this is what most of our country economies are doing, and I think we need to collaborate together to see how we can move forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deborah, for that really insightful presentation. I think you've actually brought up a few new topics which haven't been referred to yet or presented over the last couple of days. And so I'd like to draw attention to some of those, because I see some real value and some real innovation going on in Korea. For a start, too hungry to catch fish. I really like that little analogy that you drew. It is difficult when there's not enough food. How do you find the energy to build for the next stages? I think the Republic of Korea seems to be doing quite an amazing job to do just that. And the concept that you can be training up 10,000 tourism operators at this time in 2021 is a really fantastic goal, and I really wish you well with that. I also really appreciate the focus on the new technologies that you have in there. The fact that you have a plan for drone, VR and AR is really important. Drones we haven't spoken about at all in the last few days. We have talked a bit about VR and AR. Drone technology is going to be quite huge in tourism. In fact, it is a very disruptive technology. It's not just going to be large in tourism, it's going to work across many different aspects of the way we do things in this world. So I really love how you're looking forward to dealing with these types of things. I also noticed you in your presentation you talk about a number of these sort of IT buzzwords that some people might not understand. So you've got, SaaS and PaaS and IaaS. So just to affirm what those are. Software as a service, that's probably the main one that we all know about. We know that software as a service is a massive growing, it's big change for businesses. It's been growing for a while now, but platform as a service and infrastructure as a service are the other two. And it's great to see that you're supporting these types of developments. Australia has some similar things. We're building on capacity for, in particular, data and cybersecurity and IT. And the projects that we have involved, people can enrol both in short courses similar to your courses that you were talking about, but also certain groups of people can get fully funded tertiary graduate diplomas in these topics. So I think this is one of the really important things that we need to be considering across APEC. How do we accelerate people's transition from traditional job skills into these new support markets? Because, yeah, I mean, would you get a comment on that? Like in terms of how are we going to be able to support all these new changes into technology? Are we going to be able to find enough skilled workers?
I think you really do have a good point on that. I think the important part is that we need to make tourism attractive again for youngsters or the upcoming. Maybe the skilled workforce already left tourism because of this pandemic, because of this crisis. They had to find a job or just to live for their survival. And I'm not sure if they are willing to come back. Even we do say tourism is a resilient industry, but I don't think we can say or that, well, we think that maybe something similar might come back, and would tourism be well struck hard again? I don't think people, young workforces, will be attracted to tourism right now. So I think as governments, and I think first thing is we need to promote tourism as a very attractive industry, and that it is really a resilient industry, and the government and the private sector were working together to realize this. And in order to make this happen, digitalization comes in this course to make it resilient, to build back better. So I think it has to go in line with those two.
So thanks very much for your presentation and for those wise words. I think there's a lot in there for us to consider. So I'd like to invite Mr. Hai Quack to present a study on Ninh Binh province in Vietnam. Mr. Hai Quack is Head Division of Tourism Information, Ninh Binh Department of Tourism, Vietnam. He's engaged in tourism management for more than 15 years, and he is now managing the Ninh Binh tourism promotion. He's directly involved in the process of making strategies, policies and plans relating to tourism development in relation with heritage conservation for Ninh Binh province. Welcome, Hai, and I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much for me to speak today about the practice of tourism in my province. Firstly, I would like to introduce very briefly about my province, Ninh Binh. It's a small province on the north of Vietnam. It's about 100 kilometers from the capital, Hanoi. This is a tourism province because it's home to many natural and cultural tourism resources. And we have a very special property, is Chang'an. Chang'an is UNESCO recognized as Natural Cultural Tourism Resort in 2014. So it's very big access of Ninh Binh to develop tourism. In my province, most is the micro enterprise. We have a lot of hotel, guest house, resorts, and shopping mall. And the tourists coming to my province from 2010 to 2019 grow by an average of 11%. In 2019, number of tourists, we have welcomed nearly 8 million tourists and includes 900 international visitors. But in 2020, we have very influence of COVID-19 pandemic. But let me talk about the situation of COVID in Vietnam. In Vietnam, we can say that we have very successful in control the COVID-19. We have only 3,000 cases of COVID-19. And in 2020, we welcome 2.8 million tourists, but it's decreased 55% compared to 2019. And the enterprise of tourism reduce 60%, they close and go bankrupt. We have very difficult years in 2020 because most of activity is concerned to tourism, and we have benefit from the foreign tourists, but we cannot welcome the foreign tourists because of COVID-19. So the solution of the Ninh Bình province is we promote the domestic tourism, and we can see that domestic tourism is a key point to help the enterprise of Ninh Bình to survive in the COVID-19. In fact, that we organize a lot of the tourism events, workshops, and to encourage the domestic tourism. It means that Vietnamese people to travel around Vietnam and to help the enterprise. Because you know that the COVID, we only not welcome the foreigner tourists, but the domestic tourists, we encourage them to travel. And the Ninh Bình province also supports business in digital transformation because impacts of COVID-19, we have see that the digital transformation is very important for enterprise to deal with the COVID-19. And the government of Ninh Bình, they have a solution to reduce in the cost of visiting in half, in 50%, and supporting enterprise to change the human resource. As you know that Ninh Bình 2021 is host of Visit Year Vietnam 2021. This is a very big event, annual events of Vietnam to promote tourism. And we have a very successful the opening ceremony on 2020, and we have attracted a lot of the tourists, domestic tourists coming to Ninh Bình and to promote the tourism. And a lot of TV and newspaper and the press coming to the Ninh Bình to join the visit year of Vietnam. So it means that the COVID now, they have impact to the foreigner to Vietnam and the Vietnamese people to travel overseas. So that Vietnam and Ninh has a plan, very long-term plan to promote domestic and supporting the enterprise of Ninh digital transformation to promote the image to encourage the enterprise to promote the tourism image online, and the government also reduce the VAT tax, income tax, personal income tax, and land use tax for enterprise to overcome the COVID-19. So that's all I can share with you about the Ninh practice in influence of COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Mr. Quack. It's extremely interesting to hear about your province. Your promotion of local tourism has been extremely important, and I know a similar thing in many APEC economies. In particular, the concept of reducing or running programs to reduce the cost of visiting. Supporting regional tourism is really quite important in this particular way. It seems almost unfair that Ninh Binh province has been so hard hit, given that they have no COVID-19 in their region. Our next speaker, Mr. Jason Lee, is part of a project that is helping us to think about ways that we can maybe deal with the incongruities of different regions and their different models, whether they're affected by COVID or not, and turn it into a digital passport that can potentially help bring a range of different people to be able to travel to different places more easily. So this is now the start of our policy pathways and solutions session. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Jason Lee. He's a global trustee of the Commons Project. He's chairman of Vantage Asia Holdings, an Asia-focused investment group with interest in property, resources and technology businesses. He's also CEO of YSA, a specialist corporate advisory firm focused on mergers and acquisitions between Australia and Asia. Jason is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum and was a member of their Global Agenda Council for China. He has over 25 years' experience in corporate finance, law, and general management in Australia, China, the United States, and Europe. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Stephen.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. And can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. Thank you. What I might do before jumping into the PowerPoint slides is give everybody a little bit of context for what we call CommonPass and the Common Trust Network and what we're trying to do with it. The first point is to say that we think that vaccine passports will become a part of an overall solution as the world emerges out of COVID for more risk-managed and risk-weighted solutions to gradually open up borders. And the various components of that might be, for instance, a distinction between high-risk countries and low-risk countries. So those countries where the infection rates of COVID are a lot higher might have more stringent requirements versus low-risk countries where transmission rates and community transmission is very low, might have less stringent requirements. A second component might be whether passengers or whether tourists seeking to enter other countries have been vaccinated and whether they can validate and provide assurance that they have been vaccinated and tested. The third is whether they have a place of accommodation where they can effectively either self-quarantine or self-isolate for a required period of time. And then obviously, you know, a testing regime to make sure that when they go into the general community that they are not currently infectious. So we think that the vaccine passports are going to be a part of that, this sort of overall risk-weighted and risk-managed solution, principally for the second piece, so that passengers can validate in a trusted way that they have been vaccinated if they seek to travel and enter other jurisdictions. The second framing point I'd make is around this notion of trust, and that is, you know, during the pandemic, I think everybody saw that it became a lot harder to trust outsiders. And as we look to open up and our economies are opening up, we're going to have to learn how to trust each other again. And at the pointy end of that is simply, if somebody presents at our border, at one economy's border, with for instance, a vaccination certificate from another country, and that is simply a piece of paper, say with a stamp on it or a seal on it, saying that, you know, for instance, I've received a particular vaccine on this date and I've had 2 shots and therefore I'm vaccinated. How do we trust that piece of information? You know, just at a basic level, how do we trust that that particular certificate is legitimate and hasn't been forged? Secondly, how do we trust that the vaccine has been properly administered in the source economy? How do we validate and how do we trust that the vaccine that the person says they've received is actually the vaccine that they've received? And so there are, in order for all economies to open up properly, there are a whole range of trust issues that need to be overcome. And to my third framing point, and the last one, is it's not just about the validation of the information. There needs to be 3 key components of this. One is, I guess, the trusted sources, the laboratories, the vaccination clinics, the sources of the health information, validating that the passenger has been adequately medically treated. That's number 1. Number 2 is we need standards that are global and interoperable. In other words, it's not going to work terribly well if one jurisdiction or one economy has one set of standards and all the other economies have different sets of standards. It's going to turn into a mess. So this question of a global standard and global interoperability is very, very important. The third element, of course, is security. We need to make sure that whatever system is put in place is secure. It can't be hacked, or it can't be compromised in any way, because the stakes are so high. So look, with that context, let me quickly introduce what we've been doing with CommonPass and the Common Trust Network. If we could please move to slide 4. I'll skip over the first bits in the interest of time. This provides everybody with a bit of a timeline and the different components of what is encompassed in the work that we've been doing so far. It really started around the middle of 2020 when we launched Common Health. The best way to understand Common Health is the Android version of Apple Health. So on Android phones, it allows users or people to collect and store their own health information and only share it with the parties that they trust. So at the heart of everything that the Commons Project does, the Common Project is the Swiss not-for-profit foundation under which all of this work is auspiced, because we have a fundamental principle that everybody's health information should be in their own hands and not in the hands of corporations or governments. It's a foundational principle that we share. So that is Commonwealth. It's a United States system, and it has been integrated into about 270 healthcare systems in the United States. And it's really a domestic system to say if you've been vaccinated or had a test, or it's not just for COVID, it's for a range of medical records, you can share and validate those medical records with venues, border agencies, businesses, whoever is integrated into the Commonwealth system. Then COVID hit, obviously at the beginning of 2020, and we thought about, well, how do we pivot this solution to try to make a contribution to the COVID world? And so we developed CommonPass. And what CommonPass does is, again, take health information from individuals sourced from trusted sources such as laboratories or vaccination sites, and it integrates them with the border rules, so entry requirements and immigration requirements of various jurisdictions and economies, and then it produces a QR code or some other code that can be scanned at the point of entry, validating, for instance, that you've been vaccinated or that you have been tested and the test is negative. Surrounding this is an initiative called the Vaccination Credential Initiative, which is a coalition of public and private partners really trying to develop and implement global interoperable standards for sharing digital health credentials. And it's a partnership involving technology companies such as Microsoft and Oracle and Salesforce, governments, medical institutions, etc. And then the final piece of the puzzle is what we call the Common Trust Network, which is the group right and at the end, which was launched in Q1 of this year. And this is, I might just ask if we could move to, no, we'll stay there, sorry everyone. We'll stay there. What the Common Trust Network is really that network and ecosystem of validated, trusted data sources. And by data sources, I mean laboratories, vaccination clinics. And to give an example of that, say in a particular economy, somebody says, all right, I've been vaccinated from at a place in that economy. How do we give assurance and give comfort that the place that they have been vaccinated meets a particular set of global standards? That is really the purpose of the Common Trust Network. It's a registry of data sources, in other words, laboratories or vaccination centres or clinics that have been validated and trusted and made part of this this network. Next slide, please. So Common Health, I've gone over. If we could skip to the next slide to slide 8, please. So jumping ahead to CommonPass, which is really the application that allows people's health data records to be integrated with immigration rules and then scanned at points of entry. So this is really what is known in the media as a vaccine passport. We have been doing trials of this since October of last year on routes such as London and Newark and Hong Kong and Singapore. We've partnered with airlines such as United, Cathay Pacific, Lufthansa and Qantas. We'd recently completed a number of trials on the repatriation flights back into Australia with Qantas. And we are working with the various departments from a range of governments around the world in terms of integrating our systems with their border agency systems. Next slide, please. For instance, we are now fully operational on all Lufthansa flights between Germany and the United States. That solution is live and available for passengers who are flying from Germany to the US. Next slide, please. And we are also fully operational at a national level in Aruba with JetBlue. So that has been fully integrated into Aruba's entry and immigration system when people are coming from JetBlue flights. Next slide, please. And how it works is when you've booked the flight, CommonPass will tell you these are the particular set of labs where you can go to get tested. The Aruba requirements is that you have to take your test within 72 hours of departure, and that's really clearly specified. So you go and take your test, and then on the app you say, all right, well, I'm happy to share this app. share my test results, and the app will generate a digital certificate in the form of a QR code, assuming you've tested negative. If you've tested positive, you won't be able to fly. And then when you arrive in Aruba, your QR code will be screened and scanned, and hopefully you'll be allowed entry. Next slide, please. At a more detailed level, how it works, as I described, is on the left-hand side, we have the Common Trust data sources. These are the labs and the hospitals, also public health registries. Countries like Australia and New Zealand, for instance, will have central registries, vaccination registries. So when somebody has been vaccinated, for instance, their data will go into a national registry, and that can become a trusted data source as well. So then we integrate those data from those data sources with the entry rules of particular jurisdictions. What does that jurisdiction or that economy need for you to be able to enter that? It could be that you've been vaccinated with these particular vaccines and that you have had a PCR test within 72 hours or 48 hours pre-departure. And if they're the rules, we line up the health data with those rules, and the system will mint a pass, positive or negative, in the form of a QR code or another code, which can then be scanned at the point of entry. Could we please now move to slide 16? These are some of the partners that you can see. It's been an enormous undertaking, obviously, at a global level. We work with a range of health partners, from labs to medical research institutes and public health agencies. Obviously, we work on the technology side with a range of technology partners, principally Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, and Clear. And obviously, we work with travel partners, a bunch of the major airlines, as well as systems such as Amadeus, who help us integrate into check-in systems, passenger systems, and other sort of aviation-related digital systems. So that was the last slide that I really wanted to introduce. That is a quick overview of everything that we've been trying to do with CommonPass and the Common Trust Network, hopefully to make a contribution to helping the world open up as soon and as safely as possible.
Thanks, Jason. The Commons project and its various outputs really is quite an extraordinary not-for-profit. And you've achieved so much already. I suppose as we're talking across APEC member economies, I suppose I'd like you to briefly tell us about the difficulties in negotiating trust and supports across such a wide region. And you've obviously managed to do it on so many levels already. But what are the biggest complications in getting people to join in?
Thanks, Stephen. It's a challenging project because not only are there so many moving parts and so many different stakeholders. I've spoken about, there's the technology side and the health side and the government side and the airline side. There's so many different pieces. And sometimes we find that those pieces aren't necessarily coordinated themselves. So as many people on this call would know, when you're talking to a particular government, there's the Department of Health and the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Immigration Department and the Homeland Security Department, and often those departments aren't terribly coordinated either. And so it's been a real challenge just coordinating all the different pieces of this and trying to align people around a common unified set of standards, a common understanding of the best way to do this. That's number one. The coordination point has been challenging. The basic trust point has been challenging as well. Luckily, we have started with between economies that naturally trust each other. For instance, the trials that we've run between the United Kingdom and the United States, Hong Kong and Singapore. There's also been trials between Japan and Singapore, and so These are economies where there is already very high levels of trust, a lot of travel, business-related travel, official travel, so they're very, very used to working with each other. Where things will get more challenging is where we deal with situations between economies where there is a lower level of trust. So there may be certain economies that have less trust towards other economies where they feel that their health systems or their immigration systems or their government systems are less reliable or more vulnerable to compromise, for instance. And so we will need to do a lot of work to reassure governments that the data that we have is trustworthy, and that is the whole point of the Common Trust Network. In order to make it into the Common Trust Network, we have to validate that, say there's a lab in economy A, and economy A, just for argument's sake, does not have the best reputation in terms of transparency or the quality of its healthcare system, etc., etc. So there are a variety of solutions, whether it's the Commons Project sending its own people in there just to validate labs and just checking off that they meet the required standards. But that in a way is the point of it, that if we have a global standard and we can validate that a particular lab or clinic meets those standards, then they can make their way onto the Common Trust Network. And similarly, economies are just going to have to trust if there's a national vaccination registry, say economy A, its government establishes a national vaccination registry. If economy B, C, D, E chooses not to trust that vaccination registry, then that is a sovereign decision really for those governments.
Yeah, look, and I think it really is, it's a fascinating insight into real world complexities. And the truth is, this is really complex stuff. And I'm actually personally amazed with what you've achieved. I think it's a huge project. I think it works across a lot of different areas, the whole Commons project as well. And I really wish you well in implementing this, what could be a really fantastic resource for everyone to use. I'm glad it's in your capable hands, and I imagine there's quite a team of people involved, because these things are not quick. They're not easy to deal with, but I think the progress that you've made so far really demonstrates how important this is and what a commitment different member economies would need to make to be part of it. So thanks very much for coming online today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to jump from here, from one area that we've been talking about, to something quite different. So we're going to play a video next from an interview that I made earlier this week with Bundjalung Biripi artist Nikita Ridgeway. So she shares ancestral stories of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their continuing connection to dreaming through her Sydney-based creative design agency Boss Lady Design and Communications, BLDAC. As a specialist Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander agency, BLDAC is well known for utilising digital art to showcase Indigenous design ingenuity with Indigenous flair. We also know that art, and particularly Indigenous art, forms part of the tourist market for Indigenous cultures. And so this is why it's been great to have this opportunity to speak with Ms. Nikita Ridgeway about balancing the many aspects of Indigenous culture and customs in the creation of marketing for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I do feel that there's a lot in here that we can apply to different cultures, and maybe even just to develop some questions from what she's putting forward that we can apply to cultures in our own region. So thanks for that video, please, Kevin.
When you think back, from the 70s and 80s, before internet even came around, the allure of Aboriginal culture was through canvas paint art and tourists coming here to Australia, and the ways in which we market and advertise back in the 70s, 80s and early 90s. And then the internet came about, everyone adapted to different marketing. Now we have social media marketing, digital marketing. It's only natural that the Aboriginal people and culture would adapt to that aspect. Me as an Aboriginal person, it's a very proud thing to see so many more black fellas in business. And it's great to see us adapt to a digital convention. And I think if we didn't have that, we probably wouldn't have the access or the ability to actually promote from community itself, because we have access to social media at the push of a button. And it's allowed us to tell our stories. It's allowed us to adapt culture to that aspect. It's allowed us to create better understanding and awareness of the social issues we deal with and the political issues we deal with, but also the importance of just culture, because, you know, ignorance comes from being uneducated about a certain aspect, and this has allowed us to sort of ameliorate a lot of that ignorance and discrimination, and this say, this is us, this is why we are the way we are, this is what we do, this is our culture. And I'm quite thankful for the digital platforms coming up, you know, because I myself, you know, I started out as a graphic designer, and I used to be a canvas-based artist. And from a little girl, I always drew, and I used to color, and I used to paint. And then I discovered the world of graphic design and digital art, and then which led me into digital marketing and got me to where I am today. So it has digital marketing, digital art, anything digital has really elevated our people in the aspect and our culture to a whole other level. Songlines are very important because they tell the history and the story of the local area, and having the digital ability to tell stories is important, whether it be from video to written word to artistically. Like if you see in the back here, there's a piece of artwork that I've done. If I go zoom up a bit, see that was digitally done, and that represents stories and songlines, and the ability to be able to do that from a digital aspect, from me actually drawing onto a Surface Pro, to have the ability to actually do that and adapt that to artwork and to branding and business is important. But songlines in the digital space, it's been really good to see how storytelling is being told and using the digital field. There was a developer that was creating an Aboriginal game, a virtual reality experience of what it would be like for an Aboriginal person back before colonisation, and it was going to be used as an educational piece for school students and tourists. And that just brought a huge smile to my face. While the elders were really very specific about the more traditional conventions, I think for this, have the ability for you to walk in the shoes of an Aboriginal person of what it could potentially be like back in those days, gives a better understanding to share culture in that sense. I even go back to like when you go into museums, the fact that you walk up to motion censored art pieces and they speak lingo and language, you know, they have that adaptability to share that and actually hear the pronunciation. It's just great to see the leaps and bounds that our culture has adapted to in a digital aspect to create better understanding and a wealth of knowledge. A lot of Aboriginal businesses have had to adapt to a more modern aspect over the past generations. You know, we as an ancient culture, we've adapted to modern forms, and especially now with a national pandemic or worldwide pandemic, it's been an aspect in terms of, okay, how do we adapt to this new field and how do we navigate it? And in the sense of, you know, a lot of Aboriginal businesses, we've stemmed out into different industries, not just tourism, while that is a strong part that we do play within the Australian paradigm, you know, in terms of access to internet, access to information, how do we network more effectively? Aboriginal people, we're kinesthetic people, we learn and adapt, and we take in information by talking and visuals and so forth, and having that element to actually network and setting up what's working for my business, what would work for yours. We're in fashion and we're in design, what can we do, and bounce ideas off each other. When engaging with the Indigenous community, this is just not in a tourism aspect, but any aspect with Aboriginal community members in it, and that is that there's a lot of cultural protocols that you need to go through, community consultation, and that takes time and engagement, and getting permission, using artwork elements, use law as in LORE, local history. There's so many variables to it, and it can be a long process, but it's an effective process because having that community consultation is important. And the misconception when dealing with Aboriginal people in the aspect that people sort of just stigmatise the communities that we're all the same. We're not. Every mob in terms of tribes and areas is so different. So that's why it's imperative that you need to have the community-led, community-focused consultation when dealing in a digital aspect, because that needs to resonate in that and what you're using, whether it be for programming. It could be as simple as a Zoom meeting. Having an acknowledgement of country is very, very important. While we do meet in a digital space, we still sit on Aboriginal land, and the little things like that are vitally important in that sense, and it really brings that strong cultural aspect. Some businesses, you know, in terms of more remote areas, accessibility is an issue in terms of internet access, phone access, email access. And a lot of non-Indigenous organisations, when collaborating with an Aboriginal business, tend to forget that, and that can be an issue. And an Aboriginal person can really be a little bit standoffish in the sense that I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I don't have access to internet, and that itself comes down to service providers ensuring that there is access in remote areas so that they can conduct business in that aspect. I use one of my clients as an example. You know, when we were hit with COVID and social, social restrictions and social distancing, we had to actually change the whole way in which we deliver a community-led program to say, okay, how do we connect with a community member? How do we deliver this program? How do we get people engaged and keep them healthy and moving and active during COVID? And how do we ensure that their mental health is good and their social health and cultural well-being is important as well? And how do we use the digital space to do that? And we had to actually strategize and sit down and brainstorm what it is we had to do. And realistically, we didn't have the time because the field was constantly changing with more restrictions and more rules and regulations in each state. And we always had to keep shifting it. And that's the same with tourism too, because a lot of Aboriginal businesses in tourism rely on people coming to visit, and actually adapting their cultural program to a digital aspect too takes a lot of planning. For example, elders are a very vital and important part of what we do with our culture and how we adapt that to a more modern stream. And just to get access to them is an issue. My father is a stolen generation, and he's part of an organisation called Kinshla Boys Home, and they were doing workshops around elders and sharing culture and information, and as well as story business, and just having the opportunity to have those old fellas to have access to an iPad, to an internet was an issue, to the point that they went out and engaged with them while they actually had permission to go to their house and show them how to use the internet, how to use an iPad and how to dial in. These are little things that, while for everyone else is something as simple, but for an Aboriginal person who's out in remote areas or an elder that does not have access to this, nor the financial means to actually pay for it, can be a huge issue that hinders the ability to share culture. Financial means is a very big thing with Aboriginal organisations and small business startups. Having access to more workable computers, they may have an old computer, what to do to update it, what if this happens, little things like that. Like I said, everybody's different, and actually taking the time to sit down and speak with them and spend the time to say, okay, and plan and map it out is a key component in how I work with my clients. I like to start with basics, the simple basics of, what's this program, actually talking one-on-one with them and asking, what is it that you feel that you need? I'm a very huge advocate for community capacity building, teaching them how to do it themselves. And like I said, every community is different. For me, it's just making sure that, do you understand how to access this? Do you understand what this does? And then explaining the process. I'm the type of person that thinks a couple steps ahead. I'm teaching them this, but you think of the long-term effect of it and where this is going to get them in their journey and what they need for their business. And for clients, some clients may not see that. And that's why I'm an engagement consultant in that aspect, to teach them how to do it and actually see what risks are there, and this could potentially happen. Your internet could drop out and you're running a cultural workshop. What do we do? How do you troubleshoot? How do you get in contact with me when you're having an issue with it? Let's do, a facts sheet of what to and what not to do, or what they can do in that aspect. I myself am from New South Wales in Sydney, and there are a lot of initiatives such as Yapa Business Hub. They actually had a lot of workshops digitally to allow businesses to teach them how to do digital marketing and how to access digital means. So there were a lot of Indigenous-led and Indigenous-specific programs and organisations that actually got the information out there to say, let's get involved, learn how to keep your business thriving and striving to reach your goals. And I think that was great during COVID, and it was good to see not just Indigenous businesses, but non-Indigenous businesses support as well the Aboriginal community with any type of business that they have, to help them engage and just get the information out there and to learn in that aspect. So it was really, really good. I've seen the pop-up of information through newsletters and emails, community networks like IndigiMail, sharing information about how you can access information to keep your business thriving. And it was really great to see. The ability to be able to access that and have communications with other Indigenous nations, First Nations across the world is great, because we can collaborate, we can talk, we could share. Now, it's just a simple link. You know, do you have time to chat? And let's chat. You know, the only thing is the time difference. And I think the ability to allow us to do that has made accessibility better in the sense that we can collaborate, we can educate, and we can work on projects together in all industries. And I think being able to do that it's a great thing. It's changed the way in which our lives are engaging with culture, how we share our knowledge. And thinking back, you know, imagine if we never had the internet. Imagine if we, you know, didn't advance with mobile phones and video cameras and where we're at right now. You know, from the record that you showed me, like to a CD, from a tape to now you've got it on Spotify. Yes, we have digital platforms that are led by Aboriginal people, supported by government programs, but I would love to see something that realistically can be held in the hand of a non-Indigenous person. Like, I can access this, to have them to log on and learn more about their local law and history. We need more of that. We need more accessibility to elders, to see more programs based around them, to keep sharing that knowledge and those stories. And we're only just at the baseline of it now. We're slowly climbing, but I'd love to see it get to the point that, you know, kids can log onto a computer, or, you know, an Aboriginal game is something that, you know, a kid could play on PlayStation, or you look at Disney, Pixar, they're all got stories around different cultures and stuff like that. Let's see an Aboriginal story. I would love to, in the next 10 years, be able to just sit and walk out and see an area that, no matter what area or field that you go into, there's an Aboriginal aspect. That's my dream.
Thanks, Nikita, for that really interesting presentation. It was really enjoyable interviewing her earlier this week and hearing a number of the different aspects that she was talking about. I think there are many things in that 10-minute conversation. It was actually an hour conversation edited down to 10 minutes. So there are so many important topics touched upon that I think it is worth us all going back and visiting the types of things that she's talking about. We will come back to that at the end of this session. We're going to jump to our next presenter, who is now able to join us via mobile phone. So as a trusted business leader and advisor, Ms. Jan Hutton, CEO of the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse, has a proud track record delivering sustainable strategies that transform the way organisations work and taking advantage of new business opportunities through the application of digital technologies. Jan combines creative capabilities with deep travel and tourism industry knowledge, business strategy, technology experience and data-driven insights to help businesses see what's possible. And we welcome her back to our panel for today's session. Jan, we've heard a little bit about ATDW over this week in some of the other presentations you've been involved in. It would be great if you could just give us a very quick overview of what ATDW does and how wide your reach is.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Stephen. And I know you've already said this to your audience, but apologies if my timing interfered with your schedule. But great to be with you and everybody listening in. So thank you for the warm welcome. A little bit about ATDW. I'll keep it concise. We are the only Australian-owned and managed digital tourism platform as a marketplace between operators and distributors. We have just shy of 100,000 operators nationally, and are by far the strongest representation of all products, experiences, attractions, events across Australia. And our job is ultimately to drive as many leads, to generate as many bookings, to enable revenue into those operators' businesses. And we do that by building out a distribution strategy. And our distribution strategy, at the moment, we have 250 distributors domestically and globally, constantly building it. That includes all government distribution, so through every council, every state tourism body, every regional tourism body, and Tourism Australia, and then private sector or quasi. Qantas is a distributor of our content, WhatIf through Expedia, etc. So there's a broad variety of distributors, and as I say, our job is to make sure that we build out high quality profiles that have rich content, you know, up-to-date copy that fully describes, it's fully tagged in terms of consumer search. It's fully loaded with a COVID safe plan and accessibility credentials and sustainability, etc. And we fully load that profile and then populate that through our distribution network, with the sole purpose of driving the recovery of our sector by optimizing conversion. So, you know, that's the simple version. Obviously, on the back of that, there's a lot of data acquisition and other elements as well.
So we have been talking a lot today about the challenges of working not just across APEC economies, but globally, and particularly as we all share this common problem at the moment of COVID-19. So I'm interested to know, what are the challenges you find of working truly across borders and getting people working together? Are there certain commonalities that you find in ATDW's work?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, as soon as you talk cross borders, there's so many aspects to that. One is literally as simple as relationships, making sure that the right relationships are in place, that they're nurtured, that they're serviced. The lady that was on before me, I thought, just spoke a lot about that, and I love that. Like, we need to remember that we're actually in an industry that is first and foremost about people. I sit on the sharp end of that customer decision journey, and for me, it's all about digital. But whenever you talk about cross-border opportunities, it'll never be about digital collaboration first. It'll start with relationships and then look at how we leverage. And there's such different levels of maturity. So, you know, right from some of the parts of just looking at Australia, for instance, who've heavily invested in their MarTech stack, and they've got, you know, state-of-the-art technology, and their data strategies are fairly advanced. And then you've got, you know, other parts of our both from shareholders as well as our distributors that actually aren't very advanced. And you go all the way down to some of our operators. And honestly, the biggest role that we could play is to lobby for internet access. It really comes down to almost the basics of saying, when will NBN be there? Because we know that that's what opens up commercial doors for them. So I would say it starts with relationships, I would say, followed closely by a very clear vision. And sometimes I feel like we, especially in tourism and especially at the moment, we are too quick to say that our challenge is budget, our challenge is resources, and even our challenge is revenue, actually. Our challenge is very often just lack of an inspiring business plan. And I feel like all of the collaborative opportunities that we've been able to engineer over the last little while are all because there's a very clear spearheaded business plan that talks to what our recovery efforts are going to be and how we're going to work cohesively to achieve that. So, you know, it comes down to some of those basics. And ultimately, I guess it also comes down to having a very clear understanding of what survival strategies we want to implement in terms of demand side, because there's a real change in that, and there's a real new level of innovation that's required as we all reinventing. You know, it's a new marketplace. And on the other side, making sure that supply is also innovating and reinventing. It's quite interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day about innovation in their business, and they came up with a line that I love, and they just said, you know, when you talk about innovation, you need to almost understand where your comfort is within that word, because to some people, innovation literally means coming up with, you know, 4 wheels on the bottom of a suitcase. And for other people, it's literally about, you know, space tourism. So innovation is such a diverse word. And practically, if we look at what it means right now in the reality of tourism, sometimes it's actually how are we innovating with the hygiene factors like sanitization practices and how we promote them, and how we're implementing more dynamic pricing and flexible cancellation policies, etc., and promoting that stuff. So I would say one of the things that I'm seeing that really stands out is the kind of go-to-market strategy of a lot of the STOs and operators as well. And there certainly is a real doubling down in niche audiences. And I know that that's not new to any of us, but you know, it's worth remembering that amazing countries like Belgium developed their entire destination strategy around chocolate and cycling. and they own that space in Europe. And we should be looking at golfing and cooking and epic walks and hikes and how we can engage new audiences in very specific ways, where we engage them through their influences, their existing forums, in the language that they speak around that passion point, and our conversion will be so much higher. So I'm seeing a lot of the people that we're working with really shift some of their consumer strategies, which changes a lot of what their profile looks like on ATDW as well, obviously.
So I really like that concept of innovation as comfort. It ties in with my thought of, we think of COVID-19 as, quite rightly, the international disaster that it is, but are we also potentially missing an opportunity here? If we think of innovation as comfort, we can also turn COVID-19 on its head, and we discover that many economies are spending more money training people there. I think the uptake of digital has been accelerated massively. There is no question.
Hugely,
What are the potential opportunities that we could still be maximising?
Oh, total. I just want to say that I really love what you said. And sometimes these are quite sobering words, but I have all the data to back it up, that tourism is such a vital sector. We all know that. Everybody on this call understands the job creation and revenue generation of the power of tourism as a sector. But sometimes I feel like we almost take too much credit. Tourism has succeeded despite us. And now is an opportunity for us to really do that very differently. So there are a lot of opportunities that COVID has forced us to reconsider or to consider for the first time. Some of them are super simple. Like, one of the things I've been thinking about, Stephen, is we're talking about resources, and access to money right now is really important. And not to get into this in too much detail, but at the moment, the Australian government has an amazingly progressive, excellent grant program out there, and most people just have no idea how to find what grant is available and is most applicable to them. And as simple as that is, one of the things that I'm seeing is starting to emerge on the other side of this is a simplification of knowing what funds are available, what the criteria are, what your specific eligibility is, and how we could fast track small businesses having access to those recovery funds right into the hands of the most appropriate businesses quickly. So, those are some of the things that I would like. It's not a tourism specific thing, but I think it's very relevant to tourism. I also feel that, we all know this. And again, I think I caught the tail end of the previous speaker really reinforcing it. Sorry, I don't know her name. But the key thing is to exist in tourism in 2021 is to exist online. And I've spoken about it a minute ago, but we talk about how government can devise and implement strategies to deliver tools in a fast digitizing world now more than ever. As you said, it's been accelerated. And for me, that really does start with democratizing access to the internet. I won't get into that in too much detail, but I do think that it's absolutely essential, because when you start looking at ATDW's role at a national level, it's about enabling bookings through fostering digital collaboration. And sometimes it hurts me when I see the incredible experiences of products that are rural and that are just not able to participate and get the benefit of visibility to those audiences. The other thing I think is a real opportunity and a bit of a game changer, Stephen, is I feel like there is almost just a dropping of our guard. And what I mean by that is that I think so many tourism businesses have stopped competing on technology and data and really got back to competing on the basis of their own beautiful, distinctive experiences. Yes, the promotion of those experiences is totally enabled by technology. But from a government perspective, we need, again, to democratize visibility, access to customers, access to audiences, access to potential travelers, especially if we want regional tourism to thrive. So for me, this is part of the reason why ATDW is so essential to the Australian tourism industry as part of that fabric, because our sole purpose is to facilitate that in the absence of a lot of smaller businesses having that visibility. But it really does come down. I've seen a new spirit of collaboration around technology, shared licenses, shared platforms, shared projects in development. absolutely a different appetite around shared data, a lot more open data projects. Data is only relevant when it is contextual. And now for the first time, we're really starting to see that come to the fore. So I think that that's also something that is significant. And the other thing that I'll add is that I do believe that government is providing some really significant tools, some of which are urgently needed now, others which will be needed as soon as there starts being a softening of international borders. But we talk about, for instance, the national voucher programs and how they've driven change behavior and driven key outcomes and had a massive economic impact. There are also translation services, automatic machine learning translation engines that are now available that government has provided to operators. And that allows, your listing, your profile to automatically be translated into 10 languages around the world. And that might not feel relevant today, but very quickly, that's where our eyes will be on the horizon. So, there's a lot more that could be said around booking engines. And I feel fairly strongly that there's a conversation that's brewing at the moment that talks about how could we fiercely guard the revenue of our operators. We don't want to keep pushing 15, 20, up to 30% offshore. We know that over 50% of operators generate under $200,000 annually. And because of the nature of them being so many micro businesses and because of the nature of where we find tourism, it's really important that we have facilitated e-commerce strategies, digital solutions, and the type of tools that I'm talking about. And these are the things that have absolutely been fast-tracked as a result of COVID, as you said, Stephen.
Look, thanks, Jan. I think we could continue our conversation for much longer, but we are coming up towards the end of our time. So I'll need to move on. But I must say, I'm really looking forward to unpacking the 3 days of these sessions and putting them into our final report, which will be available once put together and approved. I think there have been a lot of insights that we've gained over the last 3 days. It's also quite a good segue into our very last presenter. This is via a video link, or it's actually a video, sorry. Dr. Chris Wilson. He's exploring questions around digital access and inclusion, which is sort of the perfect last thing to finish on. His research is from Australia. However, it raises many issues that apply in many member economies across APEC. Dr. Chris Wilson is a research fellow with the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne University of Technology. For more than 20 years, he's been involved in planning and conducting interdisciplinary social research that engages concepts and methodologies from a range of disciplines. We'll head across to his presentation now, and I hope it helps cement some of the complexities, how we deal with getting information shared equally. Thanks for that, Kevin.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Dr. Chris Wilson. I'm based at the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne University, and that's where I do analysis for the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. The Australian Digital Inclusion Index project is a collaboration between Swinburne University, RMIT University, and Telstra, Australia's largest telecommunications company. And data is pushed into the project from the commercial research collection agency, Roy Morgan Research. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about digital inclusion and also a bit about the Digital Inclusion Index and the measurement of the capacities and inequalities in digital inclusion in Australia. I want to also link this into the notion that promoting digital inclusion on a personal level is one way to ensure that the digital transformation of businesses in the tourist sector and beyond really yield those benefits they're looking for. Now, what I'm going to do is share some slides today as a way to direct the speech. So I'll just move across now into those. I'm going to do really 3 things today before making some concluding remarks. The first is to introduce the Australian Digital Inclusion Index, which I'll refer to from now on as the ADII, as a measure of personal digital inclusion. I'll then look at personal digital inclusion and the way it yields benefits or a dividend for tourism development. And then finally, I'll just provide some brief remarks about trends in digital inclusion in Australia. Move forward here. The ADII was developed in 2015 at the request of Telstra, who was seeking to measure or to develop a measure to understand how Australians were positioned overall to benefit from using the internet and the differences in that positioning for different groups in the community, and to use that measure to track changes over time. Previous measures of digital capacity had pointed to a digital divide between those who had access to the internet and those who did not. But as the internet has become more widely used, embedded in a range of digital interfaces from smartphones to cars, and more central to a range of commercial, social, creative, civic and government practices, it has become increasingly clear that a binary division based on access was not really enough to capture differing levels of benefit that people might be achieving through using the internet. Of course, those not accessing the internet at all remain in a position where they derive no direct benefit from this technology, and it's important to understand who they are and how many of them there are. But instead of positioning them on one side of a binary divide, it has become increasingly common to think of them as being at the lowest end of a continuum of digital inclusion, where the extent to which an individual is able to benefit from the internet is linked to a range of attributes that extend beyond simply having a means of accessing the internet. The ADII considers these attributes to fall within three broad dimensions: access, affordability, and abilities or skills. Measurable indicators of the attributes that feed the three dimensions are highly nuanced and really dig into, or allow us to really dig into, the variances in digital inclusion between people. So for access, for instance, it's not just about having a connection, but includes how often you access, where you access to different types of interfaces, from phones to computers, whether you have subscriptions to mobile and or fixed broadband services, the quality, speed of those services, and also the volume of access you have in terms of data allowances. The affordability dimension looks at how much value for money you get from your expenditure, as well as what sort of pressures that expenditure is putting on your household budget. And in terms of digital abilities, we try to capture that through indicators of attitudes to technology, as well as participation in a range of online activities with different skill demands. So our survey research captures data from individuals on more than 100 indicators, and that is used to form an overall digital inclusion score for an individual, and scores on each of the three dimensions. The scores range from 0 to 100, where 100 is theoretically a perfect level of inclusion. The data allows us to conduct geographic analysis and demographic analysis, and also to track trends over time, or changes over time. And we have data that extends between 2014 and 2020. Now, I'm not going to show these in any great detail, but there is a list of the access and affordability and abilities indicators in the appendix of our annual reports, which you can find on our website. And there's a link at the end of this presentation. So before I talk about the ADI results, I just want to make a few comments about the ADII measure and digital inclusion that will help provide a link between that and the digital tourism agenda that we're really here today to talk about. First, it's important to note the scale of the ADII. It's a measure of personal digital inclusion, a way of measuring the overall level of capacity across the Australian population and inequality within it. Now, I know that understanding digital capacity and digital inequality at the organisation level or the regional infrastructure level is important in addressing industry level development. So, for instance, in the tourism industry, being discussed today, this will yield an understanding of where tourist businesses would need to invest in digital transformation, and where regional telecommunications infrastructure upgrades might be necessary as a foundation for tourism development. That's beyond the scope of what the ADII does, but there are, of course, important intersections between personal, organisational and regional digital capacities. There's a really nice paper published some time back by two European academics, Mignetti and Borjalas, that provides an introductory model to help us conceptualise those interactions. It highlights how asymmetrical levels of digital inclusion at the personal, organisational, regional infrastructure level between tourist sources and tourist destinations can undermine tourism development. So, for example, consider where a tourist with high levels of digital inclusion, and therefore expectations around connectivity, visits a destination with poor telecommunications infrastructure and tourist businesses with limited digital capacity. Obviously, this will cause issues. Or consider the alternative, the barriers a tourist with low levels of digital inclusion might face in purchasing tourist services that are exclusively sold online by highly digitally capable organisations. Indeed, it is this link between personal digital inclusion and market opportunities and efficiencies that reveals the commercial dividend that can be achieved when high levels of digital inclusion and low levels of inequality are achieved across the entire community. It is a digital inclusion dividend that actually extends to government and all other organisations seeking to create new service provision opportunities and create efficiency gains through their own processes of digital transformation. It's no good if you transform digitally, but your customers are not there to meet you. And this is where the results from the Australian Digital Inclusion Index can help us understand the nature and extent of this issue and how it might be addressed. So let's have a look at some results. I'll try to be brief. The ADII tells us that digital inclusion in Australia has improved over time. Essentially, the majority of the improvement occurred between 2015 and 2019. So the scores went up from 54 to 63 across the entire time period in which we cover. When we look at the individual dimensions of digital inclusion and where the improvements occurred, we see that it's really in the access dimension that we've seen the most change. And underpinning this has been investments in both fixed and mobile communications infrastructure. So in the late 2000s, the Australian federal government made a commitment to overhaul the fixed copper telecommunications network that had formed the backbone of broadband provision in Australia. And by the mid-2010s, we saw that new system being rolled out, called the National Broadband Network, or NBN. It included a combination of fibre and fibre and copper, cable, fixed wireless, and satellite services. The rollout of the NBN had a positive impact on the access dimension of digital inclusion in really three ways. First, NBN technology tended to be better than what was available. So if you had broadband, suddenly your broadband was improved. The second way was because the NBN didn't really augment existing broadband infrastructure, it replaced it. It meant that people had to take up new services on the NBN network. As a result of that, we saw people who didn't have fixed broadband suddenly decide they wanted to connect into the fixed broadband network. And for those that were on the network, what we saw was they got rid of their legacy data plans that they had with telecommunications company and may have been holding for years, and took up new plans that often gave them more data and therefore a greater volume of access to the internet to expand their online engagement. In addition to the government-led fixed broadband infrastructure upgrade, we've also seen some real market investment in mobile network upgrades. We've seen the shift from 4th to 5th generation mobile networks, and of course an expansion of the transmission coverage itself. The federal government has played some role in this as well through what it calls the Mobile Black Spot program, which is really a co-investment program with the federal government, states and the commercial telecommunications organisations to build new base stations, really where there is limited or no coverage. And so that's been particularly important for rural and remote areas. And I'll talk a little bit about those areas in a moment. Actually, I'm going to go back before I do that and just and talk a little bit about the other aspects of improvements that we've seen, and that's really in the digital abilities area. There's been really a consistent improvement there across people having mobile phone skills, as well as online shopping, banking and social networking skills. And the proportion of the population able to demonstrate skills related to more advanced activities like online transactions and audio-visual communications has also increased through the period. Despite these improvements, there's one thing that's really interesting, and that is the attitudinal barriers to digital inclusion. Less than half of all of Australians think that computers and technology give them more control over their lives, and less than 40% feel they can keep up with the changing technological landscape. And that's really not changed over the period of 6 years. For older Australians, it's even worse. Just over a quarter of people aged over 65 feel empowered by computers and technology, and just 1 in 8 feel they can keep up with technological changes. Now, this suggests a couple of things. First, efforts to increase digital abilities should not simply target skill building, but also help to build user confidence. Second, and pertinent to those engaged in digitally transforming commercial and other practices, including, of course, tourism businesses, it's important that when you build these transformational apps or software, that you design them in a way for usability and also have simple and effective online and offline help available to support users and therefore make them more confident in using those technologies. I'm not going to say much about affordability, except that we're seeing households spending an increasing portion of their income on the internet access. And this does really reduce digital inclusion, particularly for those on low incomes. Despite the overall lift in digital inclusion scores across Australia, there continues to exist significant digital inequalities. And one of those areas of inequality is really geographic, and between people living in cities and high urban density areas and those living in rural areas. There's a range of reasons for this, but one of them, of course, comes down to infrastructure. And while we've seen some improvements over the last few years in that with the rollout of the NBN and some mobile communications infrastructure, there is still a differential there. And we do have different NBN technologies with fixed wireless and satellite communication really being used in rural areas, which really is a lesser quality technology than the sort of optical fibre mix that's being used in the cities. So some things to think about there. The other thing, of course, is that the ADII reveals that there are real socioeconomic contours to digital inclusion. Effectively, those on lower incomes, those outside the labour force and those with less education have very low digital inclusion scores compared to others. Also, digital inclusion is overlaid by age, and particularly once we get into the 50+ group, we see a real decline in digital inclusion for those groups. For the over 65 group, it's particularly an issue around skill development. And so some real concerns there and issues to address if we want to see a broad and overall lifting of digital inclusion in Australia for all groups. So some concluding remarks. The first one is that digital inclusion is not just about having access to the internet, but a more complex interrelated set of attributes in terms of access, skills and affordability, which together determine how digitally engaged an individual can be. Digital transformation is also an important way to create efficiencies and diversity of product offerings in the tourism sector, but it's vital that operators and policymakers understand the challenges that digital inclusion and digital inequality present to realising the benefits of this transformation. You must bring the customer with you. And that is a broader issue than just probably what you can do as a business, that you need governments to invest in those infrastructures, skill building opportunities and ensuring affordable access. Thirdly, while low levels of personal digital inclusion amongst tourists might reduce market opportunities for tourism operators, asymmetrical levels of digital inclusion at the personal, organisational and regional infrastructure level between tourist sources and tourist destinations can also undermine tourism development. So while levels of digital inclusion in Australia have risen, particularly through investment in telecommunication infrastructure, substantial digital inequalities persist here as they do elsewhere, and these are real issues that we need to start thinking about in terms of developing appropriate policies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to hand back, and hopefully this has provided some food for thought in terms of how digital inclusion is an important issue in this idea of building a digital tourism sector. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for that presentation. I think you'll find there's a lot of information in there once again, and it might take some time to go back and fully unpack. Digital inclusion is such an important aspect. It's not just around cultures, it's also to do with different ages, disabilities, so many different aspects to it. And it was great to have that presentation to round off our experience this week discussing digital tourism across the APEC member economies. So I would like to first of all, we're running very short on time now, so I'm just going to share a very short summary of some of the aspects that we've looked at today. So If we look at our current tourism situation across APEC, we're seeing between 80 to 95% loss of incoming tourism. That's a very big change. That was in 2020. Regions are also being affected regardless of their exposure to COVID-19, as in Ninh Binh region in Vietnam. Underlying important technologies that can help us adapt and change. Contactless payment systems, QR code use, online software versus mobile technologies, dealing with different risk levels for COVID-19 for tourism recovery also brings in other types of technologies, such as vaccine passports, building trust for outsiders, and global interoperability standards and security. It's great to see that there's a number of support initiatives, such as building digital capacity and competency, voucher systems, and so on. I think this is a great opportunity. Technology support initiatives go into very new areas like drone technology, big data, AI, tourism attraction systems. And finally, we finish with understanding cultural and social aspects of our regions. Digital is elevating Indigenous cultures, communication and sharing, which has been a great outcome. The importance of stories and culture in tourism is just absolutely magnified by considering the cultural aspects as well, and understanding the particular cultural needs while celebrating the power of these differences in tourism. Digital inclusion itself is highly varied, and every improvement yields positive impacts. So I'd really like to thank our many panellists and presenters from today: Hai Quack, Jeremy Tan, Deborah Park, Jason Lee, Jan Hutton, and our two virtual presenters, Chris Wilson and Nikita Ridgeway. I'd also like to remind everyone that there's a very important form for you to fill out. First of all, if you haven't gone to our WordPress site where all of the presentations and the recordings of the workshops will be available, this is the address that you need. When you get there, you'll find down the bottom that there is a monitoring and evaluation section with a feedback form, and we really would love you to fill that in if possible. So I'd like to just thank you all for being here today, and I'll pass over to Ms. Ruth Sear from DFAT and the Tourism Working Group to do the closing remarks. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thanks, Stephen. I'd just like to echo your thanks as well for all the excellent participants we've had over the last 3 days. And to you, Stephen, many thanks for your excellent facilitation of this project. Thank you very much. Also like to thank the Australian APEC Study Centre for bringing this series of workshops together. In particular, thanks to Bonnie, Kevin, Hao Tran and the rest of the technical team. Thanks also to Min from the APEC Secretariat, and of course to all our participants from around the APEC region. I look forward to seeing the digital package that we're going to be submitting to the Tourism Working Group for endorsement and then digital publication. So I look forward to that over the next few months. Thank you again, and goodbye, everybody.